This is the first of quite a few talks about something a little bit different. My next fiction book, my next novel to come out, due in May, is called Hill 112. And it's a story about D-Day and the Battle for Normandy. So it's not a period I've written about before. And I thought, I know, judging from the comments and things, that most people seem keener on the Roman stuff on this YouTube channel so far. But this is something different that I think is interesting. I wrote because I felt it needed to be written and no one else had. So I thought I'd start off by explaining a little bit about the book. We ended up with the name Hill 112, which does feature significantly in the story, but it was largely thinking of what was a good name for a novel. But the book will be released in May. Come June this year, we'll have the 80th commemoration of D-Day itself. As usual, these things will tend to concentrate on June the 6th, on the landings, on the drama of the beaches and, you know, memories of movies like The Longest Day and Omaha from Saving Private Ryan and all this sort of thing. Very powerful imagery. It'll talk about that, the landings, coming off the landing craft, getting on the beaches, fighting their way inland, and then generally speaking there's less. I mean, you get a bit in Saving Private Ryan, you've got the Band of Brothers series that has some action afterwards. However, remember, this will be the 80th anniversary, and although there will be important commemorations, the number of veterans, the people who are there, who can tell us the story in their own words, is getting fewer and fewer with every year. There are very few left now, because even if you were 18 in 1944, you know, that makes you 98 already. So the direct human memory, personal memory, where you can still talk to those who were there, is fading. And I can remember from when I was younger, as a small boy, there was still people from the First World War still around. Not so many by then, but there were some. And it made it that much more immediate, that much closer. And then they all passed on simply because, you know, age took them. Whereas I was surrounded growing up by men who'd been in the Second World War, hearing their stories, just the way they talked, the way they acted, what they talked about, as well as being a child of that generation. You know, I was obsessed with making models, airfix kits and the like, reading books, getting them from the library about battles, about aircraft, about tanks, about warships, about all these things. The games we played, we were normally, you know, British and Germans fighting each other when we were going around, when we were using sticks for imaginary guns and all this sort of thing, or toy guns if we had them. And, you know, somebody had to be the enemy, but most of us wanted to be the good guys, the allies. So we'd do that, we'd play that far more often. We'd sometimes do Cowboys and Indians things, we'd sometimes do other conflicts, but basically the Second World War was a very big deal, and it was there everywhere on television growing up. But even, you know, that direct connection where it's just one generation away is now pretty rare, and the generation itself will soon no longer be with us. You know, how many would you'll be starting to get these news stories, you're already having them, you know, member of the Dambuster squadron from the Dambuster raid passes on, how many are left, any of the few from the pilots of the Battle of Britain left, anybody from those who were at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked, people who are on Omaha, people who are at the Battle of the Bulge, how many are left? It's fewer and fewer every year. There's that great sadness that generation inevitably is passing, but the human element, the personal contact. So what I have tried to do is write a novel that gives a sense of the experience of some of that generation, of some of the people who were there, a novel that tries to give the reader an idea of what it was like. One of the big themes, of course, is that D-Day is one thing, but the Battle for Normandy lasted for more than 2 months afterwards and was exceptionally hard fought, exceptionally bloody, pretty unpleasant. So it's more than just D-Day, it's more than just the landing and okay, it's all right from here on, because a minority of the people who fought in Normandy actually landed on D-Day. And, you know, the casualties, severe though they were on Omaha, but also on sections of some of the other beaches, were dwarfed by the casualties that would follow in the big attritional battles that occurred in the weeks and months to come. That doesn't make them any less terrible, it's just that's a big part of the story. Now, obviously I wasn't there, so I'm not speaking from personal experience. What this draws upon is all the the many memoirs I've read, personal accounts, historical analysis, and the listening to the stories of that generation. Because I say they were around and they talk sometimes, they talk about the army, they talk about how things were in those days, or people who are on the home front will talk about rationing and all being under the German bombing, all of these sorts of things. The human element has always interested me, whether I'm writing fiction or non-fiction. But in this case, there are lots of very good books about D-Day. I'll do some videos talking about quite a few of them, the ones that I used particularly for my research and just to inspire the book. To come. There'll probably be one or two new ones released. There'll certainly be reissues of many of the, the books by James Holland's book on Normandy, Max Hastings' Overlord, Stephen Atkinson, Cornelius Ryan and The Longest Day, and others. These will be reissued. They're bound to be. Publishers think that way. Reasonably enough, people have an interest. There are, however, a lot of people who don't necessarily read even well-written but still serious history like that. So not academic history aimed just at scholars, but accessible history, but nevertheless there's a lot of hard information, there's a lot of analysis in books like the ones I've mentioned. But you have to read a lot of that to get a sense of a time and place. My thinking is that a novel, if it's done well, can capture the moment, can capture the sense of what it was like, what it all meant, and tell you some of the story far more quickly and far more immediately than lots of non-fiction books can. So this is what I've tried to do. This is a book about three young men. The oldest of them is just turned 20. None of them at the time would have been old enough to vote, who are serving in the British Army in Normandy. One of them lands on D-Day, they're not in the first wave. The other two are still in one of the camps preparing to go, are still training, and arrive later and get caught up in the vicious fighting of the Battle for Normandy. So it focuses on these three individuals, and we see everything through their eyes, but they get to do different roles. I'll do another talk about who they are and what they're doing and that sort of thing, and a short video. These ones don't favour really my normal rambling hour or 2 hours of spouting off on things. I'll do little things because, again, the book's not out yet. I've just finished checking the proofs of it, and I've read it and think, oh, I think this is quite good. It's a book that is the one I would like to have. Nobody had written, so I've tried to do it. I have tried to get things as accurate as possible in every respect, whether that's in the way things operate, the way units manage things, the way the fighting occurs, the way the weapons work, the smells, the sights, what you could see, what you couldn't see, the confusion of it all, the chaos of it all, the horror of it all, the black humour of so much of it. I've tried to get that right. I've done it as far as I can. This is something that has interested me since I was a kid. I've read a lot about. I've only got my own little bit of territorial OTC experience as a student of actually carrying a rifle and stripping what was effectively a Bren gun, rechambered for NATO ammunition, the LMG as they called it, and being on exercise and what you can see and what you can't see, and some of that sense of being wet, being tired, being cold, being uncomfortable. Obviously I've never been in battle. I haven't had the sense of the fear of being under shell fire, of people trying to kill me, of the fatigue of it all. I've got some sense of that from exercise, but it's not as bad when you're getting the emotional strain as well. So I've tried to put together a story that culminates when all the three other characters come together. They meet a few times in the story before then, but they all come together in the fighting in July around Hill 112. That was a battle that was often compared by men who were old enough to have been there to Passchendaele and the others. It seemed like the attritional battles of the First World War fought with all the more advanced and more deadly technology of the Second World War. So that's the idea behind the book. I'll talk a little bit more about my motivations in the next video, but that's the start. So Hill 112, a novel of 1944, I think they've put on the cover. It was a bit too long to say a novel of D-Day and the Battle for Normandy, but that's what it is. It is trying through fiction to get a story that is as accurate as possible to the times, the emotions, the attitudes, the feelings of those involved. A small sample, because obviously these were very diverse groups. The Allied armies were very large, included people from many different countries who think differently. It's about three British boys, really, as much as men, how they experienced it, with a sense of having come from quite a sheltered background. So again, we'll talk more about that later. But this is the introduction. This is the first one, Hill 112, released in May by Head of Zeus. And I hope people will like it. I hope it will give them the sense of Normandy and the battle. I hope it'll be interesting if you've already read a lot about it. But also, if you don't know so much and want to learn more, that this is a good introduction to, rather than having to plunge into all the non-fiction history, which is well worth doing, but in a quicker way to tell you a story that is as accurate as I can make it, as true to life as I can make it, as true to those times as I can make it. For me, it's a more serious novel than anything I've written before. I think it's probably the best thing I've written so far. It isn't a simple adventure story. It isn't a happy-go-lucky Western, you know, mixed military adventure romance stuff that the other books, whether about the Peninsular War or the Vindlander series and the Ferox series, it's not like that. It is more about the reality of going to war for these youngsters and what that meant. So I've tried to get it right. I've tried to make it a bit more serious. It certainly isn't literary fiction or anything like that, because I'm not up to writing that sort of thing, and to be honest, I'm not that keen on reading it that much either. I hope it is accessible to anyone interested enough, but I hope it will provoke interest in people who will hear about the commemoration, will be reminded, who know a bit, but want to sort of get the feel more deeply, more immediately, more quickly. Because again, when you're reading about characters, it's much more direct. And of course, you don't know. If you're reading somebody's memoir, then unless it says on the cover that they were unfortunately killed in action or died of their wounds and such, you know they're going to get away with it. You know they're going to survive. In a novel, you don't. Unless you're one of those odd people who flicks to the back to find out before they move on and go and start the thing. So it's, hopefully, as I say, I've tried my very best to make it as real as I possibly can with all the arrogance of someone who wasn't actually there. But there we go. Hill 112, coming in May, I think about the 23rd, something like that, of this year, 2024.